So yeah, I'm Ruth Kerracher. I'm Youth Justice Participation Lead at Staff in CYCJ. And today in my lightning talk, I'm going to talk a bit about Inside Out and some of the amazing work that they've done. Inside Out is a collaborative project between ourselves at Youth Justice Voices and Barnardo's Scotland Youth Work Team. So before I go on to talk about Inside Out in more detail, I'll give you a wee bit of an overview of Youth Justice Voices. So Youth Justice Voices is a national participation project for young people aged 16 to 25 with experience of both the care and justice systems in Scotland. The project started in 2019 thanks to funding from the Life Changes Trust, and we're now in the 4th year of our project with funding from the National Lottery. All of our work is completely led by young people. So in the community, that's Youth Just Us, who you may have heard me talk about before, and who will also be running a workshop with myself later on this afternoon. And we've also got Inside Out, which is our steering group for care experienced boys and young men employment, who I'm going to focus today's lightning talk on. So the aims of all our projects under Youth Justice Voices is really to creatively amplify voice, to provide a platform for young people to take part in a range of different participation opportunities, depending on their interests and needs, and ultimately about us really making sure that young people's voices are not just heard, but they're acted on. And what we also do is share all our learning through implementation groups, policy and practice groups, and youth justice implementation groups, which CYCJ oversee. So the approach that we've always taken within our projects and from the start was really focusing on a youth work approach. We wanted to break down some of the barriers which I think have prevented care and justice experienced young people often having an interest in taking part in participation projects. That's often because they can be quite traditional, hierarchical, and it might not feel very relevant for some children and young people. So for us, it's always been really important to start with building positive relationships. That goes for the young people, but also for the workforce, because we recognise they're the gatekeepers who will ultimately tell children and young people about our projects. And that's particularly key when we're talking about environments such as HMP, YOI Pullman, where young people are deprived of their liberty and their relationships will be built through the workers and through themselves telling young people about the project. What's always been really keen for us is to ensure that children and young people know that their views matter. And I say it again, but we'll also act on them. So I think for a lot of young people we've worked with through the projects or worked alongside with, I've often felt that they've been asked the same questions and nothing seems to change. They receive little feedback and just can become a bit disillusioned, so maybe don't feel an interest in taking part in a participation project. So for us, we wanted to make sure that the projects really do reflect young people's needs and aspirations, because the projects are led by their interests and we work and develop alongside them as well. Another thing that's been really important for us is that young people can engage on their own terms. So that means that engagement is voluntary. It doesn't mean that they won't necessarily be paid for their time or receive rewards, but it means they have the choice to take part or not. I've put engage on their own terms with a question mark here, because it does, cause some dilemmas when we go on to think about young people who are deprived of their liberty. Establishing a steering group within a youth offending institute or effectively a prison has its own challenges. It'll be affected by systems, it's affected by enemies, affected by processes, the route, managing things, a whole range of things. But what I would say is I feel like the young people who have engaged in our project have engaged on their own terms, and it's because they're passionate about driving change. So I'm just going to give you a wee bit of an overview now of, I suppose, how we took the same approach Youth Just Us in the community into a YOI. So with all our work, it really started with building a positive and trusting relationship with our partner. So Barnardo's, who do a phenomenal amount of work within Pullman, run a really great youth work team with a range of different activities and programmes. It was really great to have Barnardo's take us on as a partner, because not only did they understand participation, not only did they understand some of the issues and barriers that care experienced young people face in the justice system, but they also took the same approach as us. They valued youth work, and they provided traditional youth work opportunities, which gave young people a space to come together and ultimately to fulfil some of their participation rights, about not just having their voices heard, but having social and fun interactive opportunities whilst they spent their time in custody. For us, working in really creative ways was important as well. We recognised that if we want to take the same approach into this environment, we've got to be creative about how we do it. But luckily we have been able to do that. I think having a space which is designed around youth work really helped, as enabling us, to spend that time really building positive relationships with young people. I put truth and trust there, because also it was about, for the young people, us being upfront and honest about what's realistic, but also for the young people to have faith in us. They had faith in Bernardo, so having faith that CYCJ and staff would do all they can do to become a platform and work alongside them to find out what issues were important to them and support them on the journey. So articulating what they want to say as opposed to what we think. Another big part of us is in the earlier stages was really building fun into the work that we do. So we'd run the group on every Friday. I'd spend the whole Friday morning there. So as well as working on activities where we would gel a bit more as a team, get to know each other, building confidence to speak out. Also, big parts of that was generally just having fun and actually supporting the boys to have a bit of control over the activities, what we did. So choosing what they would want to do on a weekly basis, which did take a bit of time because often the boys hadn't been asked that. And then most importantly, the thing that young people wanted to see is, whilst they were up for taking part in larger scale things, looking at more public consultations, things that would improve the care and justice system in the long term, they also wanted to work on things which would improve things for the here and now for them within Pullman and for other young people. So after several weeks of work, and still ongoing, new young people can join the group. And obviously we had a break, unfortunately due to COVID, but we did look at other creative ways to keep people engaged, such as email a prisoner. But what we wanted to do was ensure that young people had a sense of identity and ownership over the project. So through a range of different activities, like I've sort of mentioned before, we looked at exploring what are some of the issues which are important to the young people, and our starting point was coming up with a name. So the boys decided to call themselves Inside Out because they're inside speaking out, and it quickly became apparent to us that what the boys wanted to focus on was rights. So whilst some of our young people who'd been in the establishment for a longer period of time, unfortunately had been through the care system at a very early age, been through residential and secure, and then into the justice system. For some of the boys, it might have been their first time inside. Sometimes the boys were on remand, and for others, they'd unfortunately been in and out of Pullman several times. But through that, what they spoke about is wishing that they knew their rights at a lot earlier stage, and also a real feeling that also workers didn't have an understanding of what their rights were, or when it came to being justice experience, they attached responsibilities to rights. So what the boys were really keen to do was, as well as doing lots of fun stuff and getting together in a safe space where they could focus on activities and improving their confidence and self-esteem, they wanted to focus on rights. So they wanted to use their negative experiences to improve things for others. So down in the bottom right corner, you can see this is the prison rule book. So I think one of the boys described this alongside policy and other materials that they would get, is you needed a law degree to understand it. So one of the things they've really wanted to challenge is around having proper guidance, that so young people can understand their rights throughout the justice system. So one of the pieces of work that we started working on and has now been published is Know Your Rights When Entering Custody. So this came about during lockdown, where it was recognised that young people who are going to be deprived of their liberty, unfortunately, are probably going to be facing the most rights issues, particularly as they could be locked up for long periods of time and not have access to the same support and have higher restrictions than people might have out within the community. So we were approached by CYCJ and the Children and Young People's Commissioner to look at a guide under the UNCRC about what young people's rights are when they're in custody and what rights still would remain regardless of it being locked down or not. So over several weeks, the boys reviewed what their rights were, learned a bit more about their rights, and then they worked to make it more accessible. So we changed it into more a child and young person-friendly language, and also changed the language wording and description so it would be something that they would understand within that setting. And then it was really great to see that has now been published and has went out to over 200 young people in Pullman. And the boys were absolutely delighted to see that as well, because they could see something really physical that was printed off. They knew other young people who'd accessed that. And also another big part of that was being acknowledged and recognised. So we designed a logo at a distance with a designer, and it was great to see that inside out logo and stamp on a piece of work that they'd been responsible for creating. So what's next? And I suppose what have we done so far? So the boys have came up with, they've got a range of really, really great ideas. One of the things they came up with during lockdown was to try and help other boys, particularly if you were isolating, so trying to beat boredom and isolation. So we came up with the idea of creating a newsletter, and that newsletter's now went out to everybody in Pullman. Within the newsletter, what they did was showcase different pieces of work that we've been involved in. So like I said earlier, we were working in really creative ways, so young people could not just highlight issues but actually could express themselves. So we looked at a range of different pieces of creative work where young people could express themselves and things what would relate to them. So I remember when I talked about bringing poetry in, there was kind of a thought that the boys won't like it, but they actually were so engaged with it because we looked at poems that had been written by people who'd been through the justice system, who'd experienced prison as well. And we also looked at rappers, which they really liked, and artists that they liked and what they were listening to. And we found as well a lot of the lyrics were focused on about people's lived experience with the justice system. So over a period of time, we explored the use of lyrics. We've even done creative writing and poetry, and the boys created their own poems and raps around rights, which feature in the newsletter. They were also keen to highlight actually some of the opportunities that they've had in Pullman. So one of the boys in our group is really passionate about peer mentoring as an approach to help other young people when they enter Pullman. So he decided to write a blog, and we had interviews about peer mentoring and also young people's experience of Inside Out, in the hope when restrictions were lifted, more care experienced young people could get involved. I even featured a Inside Out gaff workout, which was great, and really creative ways of using things within the cells to keep people fit and healthy and to beat that boredom. We've also been involved in sharing our views, I suppose, on more national levels. So we submitted a response on the use of bail, remand and release, and there'll be no surprises that young people believe that no under 18s should be in Pullman. They want more community alternatives and also want more considerations around the use of bail, and as well, of course, around remand. Other things that we're working on as well just now is a response to the Care and Justice Bill. We've also shared views around what lawyers should know in terms of supporting care experienced young people in police custody. And I suppose our main focus next is, as well as creating our second newsletter, is the young people really want to take it further. So they use their own negative experiences and their knowledge and skills to help equip and support other young people if they find themselves in Pullman. So what we're working on just now is creating more direct influencing routes within Pullman, so with SBS and with other partners, and the boys are really keen to come up with a range of different ideas, which I won't share yet because they've got to share that, but different ideas about activities, programmes, things that will improve things for young people within Pullman. And they're also producing their own guidance from their perspective about things that you need to know. So whilst there might be things like a prison rule book, which is hard to understand, or there's some general guidance around rights, they want to do a sort of step-by-step guide. So the really important things that you need to know, such as when you get in, how do you use the phone, who are you going to phone, how are you going to tell people how to get money into you, and so on. So these are the things that we're working on just now. I would say it's not been without its challenges, particularly during lockdown, but I think we've got an incredible group of young people who have been really passionate and really do want to drive change. So much so, we've been really delighted, as Beth Ann said, that the boys had made it through as finalists for the Pioneering Project at the Scottish Charity Awards. So this evening we've got the actual award ceremony where the boys are now calling themselves the legends. So we'll find out if they are the legends, which we know they are. But we'll be having a celebration event with the boys, which they're going to completely plan once we've found out the results of tonight. So fingers crossed for that. I just wanted to share a few final thoughts before I head and pass back to Beth Ann. But I think what's been really highlighted through the project is the real understanding that participation is actually everybody's right. It's not dependent on your behaviour, but it's a child and young person's right. So we need to work in creative and flexible ways to ensure that young people do have their voices heard and acted on. I think as well, we also need to think of participation in a much bigger picture. So it needs to be more meaningful and relevant to young people, whilst forums and more formal methods, can serve their purpose. Participation is also about, respecting young people's rights to socialise, relax, to play, to express themselves, to come together. So for them, that's just as important within an environment like Pullman as having their voices heard and influencing change. And whilst we're in full support of removing all under 18s from Pullman, I think what's coming up again and again with the boys is remembering as well that some of them were under 18 when they've been in Pullman or have come in at a later age, but they're still there. And a lot of the boys, well, all the boys in our group are care experienced. So what they want to remember people to do is to fight for their rights too, whether that's within Pullman or whether that's within adult establishments. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, so much.